Hey, Steve here, and welcome to this next episode of Processing Subscribers' Images. Now, in this video, we're going to look at this 5-bracket exposure blend sent to me by Rick Chapman, who basically in the notes said that he's just kind of hoping for a really beautiful sunrise, but was just disappointed with how this one turned out. So he sent me these 5 images, and we're going to have a look and see what we can do. Now, I'm going to be using my luminosity masking panel in the video, in the main part of the video. So, the panel, if you're not familiar with it, it's been designed to shortcut and fast track a lot of the luminosity masking techniques. Whereas before it would be a really long way round of doing everything manually to create these selections that you need to be able to blend various layers into one another. The panel basically makes all of that really easy, so you can get the selections that you want and need in just a few clicks. So, I'll be using that throughout the demonstration. If you're familiar with luminosity masking and you're happy using the manual methods, then what you can take from this video is basically the kind of the how-to stuff without the detailed technical how-tos. So I'm showing you the steps, but then if you go away and use these, do things in this kind of order and use these tips for yourself, then you'll be basically just using the manual version of what I'm about to show you. But for the purpose of the video, I'm going to use the panel to make everything easier and quicker, because I know your time is valuable. So with that said, it's probably about time that I cracked on with the demonstration. Actually, before I do, if you need the panel, there's a button just below the video where you can just go and purchase the panel and download it, and you can install it into Photoshop CS5, CS6 and CC. So okay, let's have a look at these images. Now we've got 5 bracketed exposures here, and I'm just sort of cycling through them in Camera Raw just to see what we've got. They've loaded in a funny order for some reason. Don't think I can drag them around to put the darkest to brightest ones in order, but this looks like the darkest exposure, and then the slightly brighter one, and then brighter again, and brighter again. So that's good that we've got the full dynamic range covered. What I notice about these images as I just scroll through is that they look a little bit blue, so that might be part of why the previous result was a bit underwhelming for Rick, because maybe it just didn't have that warmth of the sunrise that he was expecting, because it started out quite blue on the white balance. I'm going to make some slight adjustments in Camera Raw before we open into Photoshop. Now first, I'm actually going to click on this middle exposure and then press Command A to just highlight all of these, so that when I make my adjustments over here, it should apply that adjustment to all of the exposures. So I'm just going to slide the white balance, the temperature up a little bit. Don't want to go too far, I just want to take that blue tint away a little bit, and that'll probably do. So just scrolling between them, just checking that that change has affected all of the exposures, so that's good. We've got the Adobe Color profile. I usually on my own images I would have a preset here, but we can just use Camera Faithful or Camera Neutral, either one. I usually use either one, doesn't really make much difference for me. Or there's a whole bunch of other profiles that we can use, and we can do some basic lens corrections. This is stuff that's always in my preset anyway when I'm using Lightroom. Sharpening, noise reduction, we'll leave them as they are. So okay, let's open these now, and we should see them all appear in Photoshop, each one in its own document tab. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is get each of these layers, or each of these exposures, into a layer in one document. The way to do that, we just literally select all, so Command A, Control C or Command C to copy, and then go to the first document and press paste. So that's that one. So now we can do the same thing here, select all, copy, paste, and now we've got layer 2 over here, you notice. Now this one, select all, copy, paste, and now finally select all, copy and paste. So we've got 5 layers. I'll just double click the background layer to unlock it so I can move these all around. And let's put the brightest one on top, darkest one on the bottom. So it appears to be, okay, so yeah, these are in order now. So darkest to brightest. Now the way I usually blend these together, well, it can depend actually, depending on how much, basically we'll pick a middle exposure, say this one for example, and then decide how much we need to blend in or out from various other exposures. So this one here, I think this one we just need to do a bit of shadow recovery. And I think this next layer, layer 3, has probably got enough detail. It's got as much as we're going to want. So layer 1 here, even though it's slightly brighter and it's got nice detail in there, we're not going to end up using this because we don't want the final image to have these shadows being this bright. So that's a bit kind of redundant. So I'll just dump that one, and I'll just gradually blend some of the shadows from this layer into this one. So to do that, I'll add a layer mask and I'll invert it, so Command or Control I. And I need to grab a luminosity selection that isolates the shadows. So up here in the panel, I've got it installed already. I'll turn the previews on just in the luminosity selections area here. And then what we can do is choose any one of these numbers from left to right. So we've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All of these ones on the left are shadows. That's going to isolate shadows. 0 is going to isolate midtones, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the right hand side is going to isolate highlights. So basically 1 on the shadows side is going to select pretty much the left half of the histogram. 5 is going to isolate only the darkest shadows, and then it kind of is steps down in between, so getting darker and darker into the shadows, the higher the number. So let's start with a 3 in the shadows and just see what this gives us. So the preview here shows us basically the white parts of the preview are the darkest parts of the image. So that's what we're isolating. So that isolates the building and this this tree / bush. Not quite sure what it is. That isolates this quite nicely whilst excluding the sky. So that looks like a really good selection already. So we can hit the Use Mask button, and that will load this preview as a selection. Press Command H to hide the marching ants. So this process, if you're doing luminosity masking the manual way, would have taken maybe a minute or two just to get to that point where you've got that selection, isolating that level of shadows. So just with the panel, you've got preview on, hit the button, and then press Use Mask if you're happy with that selection. So obviously a lot quicker there. Now once you've got that selection active, which we still have even though the marching ants are hidden, we need to select the brush tool with a white foreground color, 30% opacity roughly, and then we can just brush into the image here to reveal the slightly brighter layer. And the benefit of having that luminosity selection active is that we can brush over the edges, so that we're brushing and brightening up the very edges of the building and these spiky leaves and along the edge of the mountain here. We can do that without the brush stroke going over into the sky and also brightening the sky. So here's what this looks like before and after. So here's the blended version. And now this is the single middle exposure. So maybe we'll just bring a bit more shadows out here. Again, we don't need to go too bright because it's not going to be that bright in the finished image. So there's not much point brightening it too much here. So next we probably want to blend in the sky. So let's have a look. Let's move this darker layer up here. So let's add a layer mask to this and invert it, Command or Control I. And now what we want to do is create a selection or load a selection that isolates the sky so that we can brush the sky through from this darker layer. We may have, well, we may be able to do that just using the regular luminosity selections. So let's have a look. So let's pick the, let's go 2 on the highlights end. And that's pretty good. The only issue here is that these clouds in the middle are kind of still a bit grey, whereas we want those to be bright compared to the darker foreground. So what we can do in this case is modify this preview, and one of the good ways of doing that is to hit this button here, so modify it with the levels adjustment, and we can adjust the control points here so that the foreground gets darker and the sky gets brighter. And I think that's probably going to do quite a good job for us like that. So I'll click OK. And now this is our selection preview that we can load as a selection by hitting the Use Mask button. So I'll do that. And now Command or Control H to hide the marching ants. And now with the white brush still active, I can just brush into the sky. And again, I can go over the edges pretty comfortably without worrying about the fact that it would otherwise be darkening this foreground, which you don't want it to get any darker than it already is. So let's just go around here, brush this sky in, probably go a bit stronger on the brush actually, just to get the darkness coming through. Okay, so that's pretty good. And yeah, that'll probably do for that blend, for this layer. Now, we've still got this very darkest layer. I'm not sure if we really need to use this one either because, well, maybe it's just going to help us recover the very brightest parts of these shadows. The only issue with that is that it might kind of over blend, so we might be brightening this. Let me just zoom in to show you what I mean. So we've got this kind of brightest edge of the cloud along here in this darker exposure, which has still got that colour in it, whereas here it's a bit overexposed. Now if I try to blend this in with this slightly brighter layer, then it runs the risk of, you know, having bits that should be bright actually being darker than the bits that should be darker, if I got that the right way around. But we can have a look and see if we can achieve a good result. So let me zoom in again. Okay, so add a layer mask. Making sure to remember to deselect the active selection first. So add a layer mask, invert it. And now let's create a selection to isolate the brightest highlights. Okay, that looks like it does the job. So click Use Mask, Command H, and now a very low opacity brush. Let's just brush through here. Okay, that's actually working better than I thought it was going to, so let's continue with that just along these bright edges. And the luminosity selection is making sure that I'm not brushing outside of these brightest parts here, so we're only recovering the colour where it needs to be recovered from the overexposed bits. Okay, so that's pretty good. Just check up here and around here if there's any other bits I need to do. I don't think so. But yeah, that's a real subtle change, but one worth doing. So let's just have a look at this mask to show you how little of this layer we've actually used. Yeah, so there we go. But again, when you're trying to get everything as good as it can be, these are the sort of little perfection, sort of touches of perfection that you can strive for. So, okay, next step, now that we've got this blended image, is to start processing it properly. So, yeah, let's have a look at what we can do. So first I would normally try to make sure the color is all good. I think we could maybe inject a little bit of warmth into the image at this early stage. So let's see what happens. So this might work well, it might not, but let's try anyway. So I'll turn the preview off on the luminosity selections, and I'm just going to activate a highlight selection. So without the preview button turned on, it just goes straight to making the selection without showing us the preview. And then with this highlight selection active, I can go to my color section in the panel and hit the warm button. So this is essentially going to warm the highlights of the image. So it kind of flashed, like the whole image went warm there just while it was working on it, but then when it applies the mask, it applies the mask once it's finished doing its job. So here's the difference. So here's before and here's after. So we've warmed the sky mainly, but highlights as well, and none of the shadows. So that's a good starting point. I think this is going to work quite nicely. And so let's start looking at introducing a bit of contrast. So in the panel, I've got a few shortcuts to some of the most common adjustments that I create myself and that I teach in my various courses. So, you could go and create your levels and curves adjustments here, but there's a couple of handy buttons here if you want to do it slightly quicker and save a few seconds. Every second counts, I guess. So let's hit this first levels button here on the contrast section. And that's given us a base adjustment, so a bit of a contrast adjustment there, but we can still tweak this as normal. So let's just push these control points together and see what we come up with. So here, just looking in the foreground, that's a nice contrast adjustment. Obviously it's overexposed the sky, and the shadows have gone too dark, but I think that's quite good in the majority of the foreground. So what we can do is now basically mask this adjustment in or out depending on what's going to be the most work. I think it's going to be more work to actually adjust this to mask it out of the sky and the shadows rather than mask it into the parts of the shot that we want to use it in. So we can start off just by inverting this, so Command or Control I on the mask. And we can have a white brush selected. And to make sure that this adjustment focuses mainly on the midtones and doesn't affect shadows and highlights, we can actually create a luminosity selection to help us restrict that. So using the panel again, let's turn on the preview and let's create a base selection. So let's go with the highlights here. Now we want to add the shadows to this. So I'm going to check the add button. I'm going to click on a shadows selection button here. So we're going to add this selection to the previous selection by clicking apply. And now what we need to do is remove the brightest highlights and the darkest shadows from this selection. So let's click subtract. And now we want to subtract the brightest highlights, which is this. So I'm going to click apply. And now we want to subtract the darkest shadows. So I click apply. And now what we're left with is a weird looking grey mask, but where the brightest highlights are black and the darkest shadows are black. So if I use this, if I load this now as a selection to brush through into that contrast adjustment, then no matter what I do with the brush, it's going to avoid brushing into these brightest highlights and darkest shadows. So in other words, this is a mid-tone mask, but one that has been a bit more subtly crafted than just the regular mid-tone mask here, which might not quite have covered the full range that we want to cover. So, okay, I'm going to click Use Mask, and I'm going to hide the marching ants. And with my white brush, I'm just going to now brush this contrast adjustment into the hills and the rock in the foreground. Actually, I can probably go a bit more heavy just for the sake of speeding things up. A bit more heavy on the opacity, so just increasing the contrast around here. Let's have a look at what that's given us. So yeah, we can use this a bit in the sky. We don't want to go too much. So that's pretty decent adjustment. So that's just one contrast adjustment. Normally in my workflow, I would continue on to do many of these types of adjustments, focusing on many of the sort of individual parts of the shot separately. But for the sake of speed and time, I'm not going to do a full walkthrough here. Where are we? We're already up to 22 minutes, so I'm going to try to finish this one soon. But yeah, from here we would normally carry on. Actually, I'll just do one more adjustment, so just to see how good we can make the sky look. So I'm going to deselect my active selection, Command D. Let's add a levels adjustment, same as before, but this time let's ignore what it's doing in the foreground and just look at the sky. So it might mean just darkening a bit, using this control point in the middle here. Now is that okay? That's not the greatest, so maybe just darkening the image in the sky would have just as good an effect. Okay, I think that sky looks a bit nicer than this one. So let's get rid of that levels adjustment and use the darkening curve. And let's now invert this mask and brush into the sky. So again, I'll just create a quick luminosity selection. I'm not going to uncheck subtract there. That's just left over from the last bit that I showed you. So we want to do this in the highlights. Okay, that'll do. Yeah, I'm just rushing through a bit quickly. You would maybe want to spend a bit more time creating a slightly more accurate mask that isolates the highlights. But here we go. Let's just brush the darkness into the sky there. So that's not too bad. Command D. Let's just also see what we can get from an auto effect layer. So we've got these handful of effects that I use on the fairly regular basis. One of them is the auto effect. So again, this is something there's tutorials for, but with the panel you can just create it in one button, and it creates the effect with a black layer mask. But we can invert the mask just to show us the effect of that, just applied to the whole image. Now that is okay, it's a bit strong, so we can either reduce the opacity of the layer just until those shadows come back, so that looks quite nice actually. Or what we can do, I'll just show you, actually I'll just hide this layer, and I'll just show you another thing we can do. Combine the effect with a highlight selection. So if we want this effect to only be in the highlights, we can turn the preview off, click the 1 button on the highlights end of the scale here. Just come straight down and press the Auto button, and that is going to create the Auto effect layer and load a luminosity selection directly into the mask, so that the effect only applies in the highlights. So that's a quicker way of getting a subtler version of this effect. Well, quicker. So you can do that, or you can do what we did just a second ago and create the effect first and then adjust the effect as you see fit. So you could brush this out of the shadows if you wanted, or you can just reduce the opacity and adjust that. Let me just see, I'll load a shadow selection and just see what we can do. Command H. Let's mask this out of the shadows manually with that selection active. So here, that's what that would look like. And I think that's pretty good. I'm quite happy with this. So, given the color that was in the scene, I think this isn't necessarily the brightest, most colourful and spectacular clouds in the sky, but using some of the warming techniques at the start that I showed you, and then using this autumn effect afterwards just to give the image a bit of glow, I think we've got a really nice result. So I think I'm probably quite happy with that, and we'll leave it there. Obviously this isn't a full entire end-to-end workflow. If you are familiar with my 6-stage workflow, then there's a few steps that I've kind of missed out here, but really the main purpose of this video is to show you the blending process, and then just how to basically bring some warmth into the image and some contrast, just to make it pop as quickly and easily as possible. So with that said, if you'd like to download the panel, there's a button below the video where you can do that. And if you'd like to send me any images for me to use in a future video, then go to luminositymasking.com and click on one of the previous episodes, and you'll see a button there that you can use just to send me the images via a form that you can upload your images to, and make some notes to tell me what it is that you're looking to learn. And with that said, thanks for watching, and I think that pretty much covers it, so I'll sign this video off and talk to you soon. Cheers.